On my wedding day, I watched my sister set everything on fire, literally. One second, I was smiling at my husband David as the jazz band played soft in the background, and the next, Vanessa was leaning toward a row of candles on the reception table, her hand clutching a lighter she must have smuggled in her face, glowing with some kind of twisted satisfaction. At first, I thought she was just being dramatic again, trying to draw attention until the flame leapt from the candle to the silk table runner soaked with spilled wine. It happened in seconds faster than my brain could process. The fire spread like a hungry beast crawling toward the hem of my wedding dress, the one I had saved for 3 years to afford the dress that represented every long night and every flight I took just to build a life worth celebrating. The guests screamed, chairs scraped the floor, people ran in all directions, and all I could smell was smoke and fear. When I looked down, I saw the edge of my dress catching orange sparks devouring lace and satin like it was paper. My stomach dropped as if the floor had disappeared. David shouted my name. Someone threw water that missed completely, and in the middle of chaos, my sister Vanessa laughed. She laughed, then screamed across the hall, her voice slicing through the panic. "This is what you get for acting like you are better than me." Her words were louder than the fire alarm, louder than the shattering glass of champagne flutes crushed under rushing feet. Guests stared at me not with joy anymore, but with horror. Pity, even confusion, as if maybe she was right, as if maybe I had done something to deserve being publicly humiliated and set ablaze on my own wedding day. My mother ran to Vanessa, pulled her into her arms like a victim whispering, "She just needs to let it out," while I stood there with smoke filling my lungs, my dress in flames, and my heart collapsing under the weight of betrayal that had been building for years. I did not scream. I did not throw anything back. I did not beg anyone to see me. I just froze silent as the fire was finally stamped out and the reception turned into a crime scene of blackened fabric, broken desserts, and shaken relatives who would never look at me the same way again. And in that silence, in that exact moment, something inside me broke, but something else hardened too. That night, while the ashes of my wedding still lingered in my hair, I made a decision no one in my family expected. I was done being Vanessa's safety net, done being the one blamed, controlled, gaslighted. They thought the fire ended at the venue, but the truth was, it was only the beginning. People think weddings are one day, one ceremony, one meal, but the truth is, a wedding is built on years of sacrifices, and mine was built on sacrifices no one in my family ever cared to see. My name is Lydia. I am 28, and before that day, I had spent nearly a decade clawing my way towards stability. I worked consulting jobs that barely paid enough to cover the rent, took flights where I slept, sitting up in airport lounges because I could not afford a hotel, said yes to projects that drained me just so I would not fall behind, and saved every extra dollar, so that when I finally found someone worth marrying, I could create a day that reflected not just love, but survival. David. My husband saw all of it, respected all of it, and when he proposed, I swore that no matter how small our wedding would be ours. What he did not fully see, what no outsider could, was the shadow always dragging behind me. That shadow was my older sister Vanessa. She was 31, beautiful in the kind of careless way that feeds on attention, dramatic in the way that draws sympathy, and destructive in ways only those closest to her ever experienced. From the time we were kids, she learned that throwing tantrums got her what she wanted. My parents reinforced it. When she failed classes, it was because teachers did not understand her. When she wrecked a car, it was because the world was cruel. When she maxed out credit cards, it was because the system was unfair. And when I quietly cleaned up her messes, I was told it was because I was responsible, the stronger one, the one who had it together. I was gaslighted into believing it was my duty to catch her every time she fell. Even in college, when she begged me to co-sign a lease, my mother said, "Do it. She needs stability. She will figure it out." When she overdrew her account, I wired her $500 just until Friday, then heard nothing for weeks. When she totaled another car, I paid her portion of the insurance increase because my father said family means sacrifice. And each time I told myself it was the last time, but guilt always pulled me back. By the time David came into my life, I was exhausted but still trapped. Vanessa had already borrowed $12,000 for tuition, another $4,000 for so-called emergencies, and countless little transfers labeled with empty promises like, "I will pay you back next week," or just until payday. I kept thinking if I gave her one more chance, she would stabilize, she would stop spinning, but she never did. She only spun faster. 3 weeks before the wedding, she called sobbing about her car again. It was done, she said. Dead. She needed a replacement now. She reminded me I had the money. I was the one with the good job, the good fiancé, the one living the dream while she struggled. I told her no. It was the first time in years I said no. Not because I lacked the funds, but because I was tired of being her safety net, tired of funding her chaos. She hung up without saying goodbye, and I should have known she would not forget. Vanessa never forgot a refusal. She stored it like a weapon. Leading up to the wedding, she went silent. No congratulations, no offer to help, no sign of interest. Some families might have taken that as distance, but I knew better. Vanessa's silence was not absence, it was pressure. It was her way of saying, wait, you will see. And deep down, I did see I always had, but I buried it under hope. Hope that maybe this time she would be decent. Hope that maybe one day my parents would stop excusing her. Hope that the people who claimed to love me would stand on my side instead of hers. That hope was foolish. August 14th was meant to be my day, and I thought maybe the universe would spare me. Let me have one evening without drama one night where my work and my love and my peace could shine. But Vanessa never allowed anyone else to shine. For her, the world was a stage, and every spotlight belonged to her. My wedding was just another chance to remind everyone of that. She arrived late, slinking into the venue in a crimson backless dress, smirking as if the whole event were a performance written for her alone. She did not smile at me, did not greet David, did not even glance at our guests. She poured herself a glass of champagne, leaned against the wall like she was attending out of pity, and when I caught her eye, she looked through me like I was no one. That cold dismissal told me everything. It was not sadness, not jealousy. It was a warning. She had come not to celebrate, but to burn everything down. The warning signs were there, obvious to anyone who knew her, but that was the cruelest part, because everyone had seen them before and chosen to look away. So when they showed up on my wedding day, no one dared call them what they were. Vanessa arrived more than 40 minutes after the ceremony had ended, and she made her entrance as if she had been waiting for the perfect moment to ruin the air. The doors swung open, and there she stood in that crimson dress that clung like a costume, her hair piled high, her lips painted dark, her heels striking the floor with the rhythm of someone arriving not to support but to compete. She wanted every head to turn, and they did. A murmur spread across the reception hall, some guests whispering how stunning she looked, others shifting uncomfortably because even they felt the imbalance, though none of them would say it out loud. Vanessa thrived on discomfort. She scanned the room, eyes sharp glittering not with pride but with calculation until they landed on me. There was no warmth, no sisterly joy, not even a fake smile. She looked at me like I was a stranger, taking something she believed was hers. That was the first blow, subtle but slicing. I forced myself to keep smiling, to lift my glass, to thank guests who congratulated us, pretending not to feel her stare searing into my back. But I felt it. Every time I turned my head, there she was watching. The next sign was the drinking. She downed champagne like water, her throat working, as if she needed to swallow her rage. Each time a waiter passed, she snatched another flute, barely letting the bubbles settle before she tipped it back. At one point, I saw her standing near the dessert table, tapping her glass against the edge harder and harder, as though testing how much it would take to shatter. A friend whispered to me that she looked restless, maybe jealous, and I nodded but said nothing. I knew jealousy was not just a flicker for Vanessa. It was fuel. The way she moved across the room was another signal. She did not mingle with our relatives or David's parents. She hovered, pacing like a predator, circling prey eyes, darting between me, the guests, and the decorations as if she were mapping the room for destruction. When David's aunt tried to speak with her, Vanessa answered with clipped words, her smile tight, then turned her back mid-sentence. Guests laughed awkwardly, brushing it off as nerves, but I saw it for what it was, contempt. She was not nervous. She was preparing. Even her silence was loud. Whenever I caught her alone, leaning in the corner swirling the dregs of her drink, she was too still, too composed. Vanessa's silences had always been preludes. They were storms waiting behind closed doors. They were knives waiting to be unsheathed. My stomach knotted tighter with every passing minute, but my mother's words trapped me. She had leaned close earlier and hissed, "Do not make a scene, Lydia. Whatever Vanessa does, let her be. She just needs to feel included. Included, as though inclusion excused sabotage, as though love meant giving her the freedom to destroy." That gaslighting was its own warning sign, the clearest of all, because it told me what would happen if Vanessa exploded. They would run to her, shield her, and leave me to burn. Still, I stayed silent, stayed polite, held David's hand under the table, hoping maybe I was imagining it. But deep down I knew. The heat in her eyes, the rhythm of her steps, the recklessness of her drinking, they were signals written in fire. I just did not realize how literal that fire would become. The explosion did not come with a warning shout or a sudden crash. It came disguised as part of the celebration, woven into the moment that should have been the safest. I had just stood up with David to give our toast, my hand trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of all the years that led us here. The lights glowed warm, the soft hum of jazz floated through the air, and for the first time that evening, I felt a flicker of peace. I looked out at the faces of friends and distant cousins, the people who had flown from other states just to see us tie the knot, and I thought maybe Vanessa would let me have this one moment. I should have known better. My glass was raised to the rim, just touching my lips when Vanessa moved. She pushed her chair back with a sharp scrape that cut through the room. Heads turned. She rose slowly, deliberately, her red dress catching the light like a warning flare. For a brief second, I thought she was going to speak, maybe offer some twisted version of a toast, and I braced myself for words. But it was not words she offered. It was fire. With one swift motion, she grabbed a decorative candle from the dessert table, her fingers steady. Her eyes locked on mine, and before anyone could process, she tipped it onto the silk table runner soaked with champagne. The flame leapt upward like it had been waiting, catching faster than anyone could react. Gasps filled the air, followed by screams as the fire spread, running across the fabric, climbing toward the plates, leaping to the flowers. I stood frozen, my mouth still open, mid-toast as the heat licked closer to me. Then it happened. The hem of my dress brushed against the edge of the table and caught. For one horrifying moment, I felt the heat sear through the layers, smelled the acrid stench of burning lace, and saw the smoke curl upward. My dream dress, the symbol of every sacrifice I had ever made, was turning to ash in front of my guests. Chaos erupted. Someone shouted to call 911. Chairs toppled. Children cried. Glass shattered under rushing feet. David lunged forward, ripping his jacket off and slamming it against the flames on my dress, stamping them out before they reached my skin. My heart thundered so loudly I could not hear the music stop, could not hear the fire alarm until it shrieked seconds later. And over it all, slicing through panic, came Vanessa's voice. She screamed her tone, triumphant venom dripping with every syllable. "This is what you get for acting like you are better than me." She screamed it not once, but 3 times, each louder, each forcing every eye in the room to look not at the fire, not at the chaos, but at me. And in that moment, with smoke still clinging to my gown and my guests staring wide-eyed, it worked. I saw the flicker of doubt in their faces, the unspoken question of whether maybe she was right. Maybe I had pushed too hard. Maybe I was the problem. That was her power. Not the fire, but the narrative. She could twist any destruction into a story where she was the wounded soul and I the cold oppressor. My mother proved it seconds later. She rushed past me, past David still patting out embers, and threw her arms around Vanessa like she was shielding her from attack. "She is overwhelmed. She just needs to let it out," my mother cried, holding her like a soldier dragged from a battlefield. I stared at them, my mother and my sister clinging together in a performance of victimhood while I stood in smoke and ruin. David's parents looked at me in disbelief, their jaws tight, their eyes searching mine for direction. My best friend at the bridal table froze his hand halfway to his phone, unsure if he should call the police or stay quiet. Even the DJ stopped the music mid-track, leaving the room filled with nothing but the shriek of the alarm and the crackle of burning fabric. I could have screamed. I could have shouted the truth. I could have begged everyone to see what she was, but I did not. I stood still silent, watching her smirk even as my mother whispered in her ear. My silence was not weakness, it was a shield. Because if I fought her there in that moment, the story would have become hers again. So I pressed my lips together, forced my breathing to steady, and nodded at David when he asked if I was all right. We let the coordinator douse the last of the flames, usher the guests toward the exits, assure everyone that the fire was contained. But the damage was already done. The cake lay smashed on the floor, toppled in the chaos, its sugar flowers crushed into the carpet. The decorations where blackened smoke clung to the ceiling, and the perfect memory I had worked years for had been scorched in under a minute. My wedding day, the day that was supposed to define joy, had been turned into a spectacle of violence and humiliation, and Vanessa, standing there with soot on her dress and satisfaction in her eyes, walked out of the venue like she had won. There was no apology, no shame, not even a backward glance. She strutted through the smoke as if she had proved something, as if setting me on fire was justice. Guests whispered, some horrified, some confused, some unwilling to admit what they had witnessed. My mother followed her, still holding her hand, murmuring, "She just needs help. She did not mean it." And I, standing in the ruins, realized the truth. This was not an accident. This was not a moment of emotion. This was a pattern sharpened to its deadliest point. And I knew then, as clearly as I had ever known anything, that I would not fight her in that room. I would fight her later in silence, in strength, in ways she would never see coming until it was too late. The night did not end when the guests were ushered out and the last ember was stomped under a boot. It ended in silence, the kind of silence that suffocates more than screams. David and I rode home in the back of a car that smelled faintly of smoke. My gown charred along the hem, my veil stained with soot. Neither of us spoke because there was nothing left to say. Every photograph, every flower arrangement, every carefully chosen song had been eclipsed by the fire Vanessa lit. When we reached the apartment, David carried me over the threshold, a gesture meant to be romantic, but the ash that flaked from my dress onto the floor turned it into something else entirely. I excused myself to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the burn mark that had nearly reached my skin, and for the first time all day, I let myself shake. My hands trembled so violently I could not unpin my veil. David knocked softly, asked if I was all right, and I forced my voice to sound steady when I answered yes, though inside I was not. But beneath the trembling, something harder was taking shape. Anger, yes, but sharper than anger, colder than rage. It was clarity. For years, I had been told to forgive, to be patient, to understand, to protect. For years, I had been forced into the role of savior, protector, enabler. Tonight, watching the flames devour what I had built, I realized I was not saving anyone. I was being destroyed piece by piece. That clarity guided me as I peeled off the ruined gown and slipped into David's shirt as I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened tabs that had nothing to do with honeymoons or thank you notes. The first thing I did was log into the university portal where I had quietly paid a $12,000 deposit for Vanessa's next semester. My stomach turned at the thought of it the way I had justified it, telling myself she would fail without me telling myself she just needed a hand. With a click, I revoked the payment. $12,000 vanished from her account, and I felt my lungs expand, as though I had inhaled oxygen for the first time in years. Next, I opened the rental portal for the apartment she shared with 2 other girls, the one I had co-signed against my better judgment. I scrolled to the account status, clicked freeze, and set it for review. The lease, once her safety net, was now a trap closing around her because without me, she had nothing. The rent was due in 5 days. I did not stop there. I drafted an email to the insurance company detailing the fire, attaching photographs of the damage and noting the suspicious circumstances. I did not name her outright, but the evidence was there, woven between the lines. When I hit send, my body finally stopped shaking. It was not revenge, not yet. It was protection. For myself, for David, for the life I refused to let her consume anymore. At around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Vanessa's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. She called again, and when I still did not answer, the messages came. What the hell? Why is the portal locked? I cannot access my account. Did you do this? Each text was more frantic, more accusatory, until the final one landed like a stone in my chest. Fix this. Not please. Not help. Fix. As though I were her mechanic, her bank, her servant. I placed the phone face down, muted the vibrations, and made myself a cup of coffee, though the sky was still dark. David came out hair messy, eyes heavy, and asked what I was doing. I told him nothing he needed to worry about. He looked at me for a long moment, then kissed my forehead and went back to bed. He trusted me, and for the first time I felt like I could trust myself too. Outside the window, the city was still unaware of the ruin my sister had left in her wake. But inside me, a decision had already been carved in stone. The wedding was over, the chaos was behind me, and the reckoning had just begun. The days that followed should have been filled with thank you cards and photo albums, lazy mornings with David and laughter about the funny little things that went wrong, but instead they were filled with vibrating phones, endless messages, and the suffocating weight of a family that refused to see reality. Vanessa did not vanish after the fire, she doubled down. By Monday morning, she had called 17 times, left 8 voicemails, and sent so many texts I stopped counting. They began with outrage, the furious tone of someone whose entitlement had been disturbed. How dare you touch my tuition? You cannot just freeze my lease. You are sabotaging me. They shifted into threats. I will sue you. You will regret this. Everyone will know what you did. And then, when those did not get a response, they became pleas, thinly veiled attempts to crawl back into my wallet. I was overwhelmed, Lydia. I did not mean to hurt you. You know I need this semester. You know I have nowhere else to go. Each one came with the same undercurrent I owed her. I had always owed her, but I did not answer. The silence was my boundary. My parents noticed the silence before they noticed the fire. On Tuesday, my phone rang with my mother's name. I let it go to voicemail thinking she would leave a simple message. When I finally listened, her voice dripped with disappointment. Your sister is very upset. She feels abandoned. Call me! Abandoned! That was the word she chose, as if Vanessa were a child left on a doorstep instead of a grown woman who had lit her sibling's wedding dress on fire. My father called later that night. He sighed heavily the way he always did before delivering his lectures. We need to talk about your sister. She is spiraling. You need to help her land. What she did at the wedding was just emotions. Do not take it personally. Be the bigger person. I nearly dropped the phone. Be the bigger person. I had been the bigger person my entire life, bigger to the point of breaking, and still it was never enough. I told him I had already been bigger for years, and I hung up before he could say family unity. The gaslighting was relentless. Messages from extended relatives began appearing too, all of them primed by the story Vanessa had spun. She told them I had overreacted, that I had blamed her unfairly, that I was trying to ruin her future out of jealousy. They messaged me lines like, she is your sister. You will regret cutting her off, and blood is thicker than water. I wanted to scream that none of them had been there when she smashed windows drunk at 2 a.m, and I paid the landlord none of them had been there when she overdrew her account and begged me for money just until Friday. None of them had been there when she wrecked my parents' car, and they quietly had me cover the deductible. But screaming would have changed nothing. They would have believed her anyway. That was Vanessa's gift. She played the victim so convincingly that even with flames licking my dress, people wondered if I had provoked her. By Wednesday, she escalated further. She showed up at my apartment pounding on the door so hard the walls shook. David looked through the peephole and cursed under his breath. She was standing there with her mascara streaked down her face, screaming my name, screaming that I owed her, screaming that she would not leave until I fixed everything. I sat on the couch, frozen, every muscle taut. David wanted to call the police immediately, but I shook my head. I wanted to see what she would do if ignored. She pounded for 10 minutes, rhythmic, insistent, like a child demanding entry. Finally, David cracked the door an inch, told her to go home. She tried to wedge her foot inside. He pushed back, his voice cold, and told her if she came again, he would press charges. She shrieked that I was ruining her life, then stormed off shouting that she had legal rights. Legal rights to my money, my name, my stability. But she was wrong. I was the primary on the lease. I was the account holder. Legally, she had no power. For once, I did. The following day, she sent a long email subject line, "Are you seriously doing this?" Inside, a full breakdown of her expenses, a plea for me to reinstate the tuition, a warning that if I did not, she would have to drop out, that if she got evicted, it would be on me. At the end, she tried guilt. "I ruined your wedding because I was overwhelmed. You should understand. You are the only one with real money. You are letting it go to your head." I did not reply. Instead, I forwarded it to David with a note that read, "Your turn to see the circus." He read it silently, then shook his head and said nothing. The silence between us was not awkward. It was solidarity. On Friday, Vanessa came back again, this time waiting until David returned from work and trying to slip through the door behind him. He shoved her back into the hallway, told her she had crossed a line, and when she hissed that she was family, he answered that family does not light each other on fire. Her face twisted, her eyes wide, and then David did what I had never seen him do before. He grabbed her by the arm, dragged her down the hall, and shoved her away from our door. No drama, no hesitation, just clean force. She screamed, stumbled, cursed, but David did not flinch. He locked the door behind her and returned to me breathing hard but calm. In that moment, something shifted inside me. It was not just me against her anymore. It was us. That night, as we sat on the couch drinking wine in silence, I realized what had truly changed. For the first time in my life, someone else had drawn a line with Vanessa, and he had drawn it in permanent ink. The invitation to my father's birthday came the following week, a message in the family group chat that had been dead for months until Vanessa revived it with her manipulations. My father added me, my mother, David, and Vanessa, and wrote, "Let's have an honest talk without yelling or blocking. We are still a family. It was laughable, the idea that one group chat could erase fire theft and betrayal, but Vanessa chimed in first, typing paragraphs about how hurt she was, how she had acted out at the wedding because she felt invisible, how I had rubbed my success in her face for years. My mother followed, typing in her gentle scold, saying it was time to move forward, that Vanessa was still my baby sister. I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse throb. She was 31, not a baby, but to them she would always be fragile, delicate, excused. David read over my shoulder, his jaw tight, and when I did reply, it was 3 sentences. "She is not a baby. She is 31. She needs to learn the cost of disrespect." After that, silence filled the chat. No typing bubbles, just a void that spoke louder than arguments. Days later, my cousin Kara told me Vanessa would be attending the birthday party. She would be bringing someone new, a man she had met 2 weeks earlier and had been telling everyone big things were coming. Kara rolled her eyes, said she seemed manic. I prepared myself anyway. On the night of the party, David and I debated not going, but I knew deep down there would never be another chance as perfect as this to end the narrative once and for all. We arrived late on purpose, stepping into a house buzzing with forced cheer. My father greeted us stiffly. My mother avoided my gaze, and then I saw her. Vanessa standing near the cake table again, but this time in a white jumpsuit that looked suspiciously bridal, holding hands with the real estate man, as though she were debuting a fiancé. She spotted me and smirked. She had been waiting. The dinner went awkwardly, chatter-forced laughter brittle. At one point, Vanessa raised her glass and announced she wanted to speak. The room fell quiet. I braced myself. She began with a quivering voice, talking about family, about feeling unseen, about how she had made mistakes but was misunderstood. Then, with practiced tears shining in her eyes, she looked at me and said, "I did not set that fire." Lydia panicked. She overreacted. She blamed me because she cannot handle not being the center of attention. Murmurs rippled through the room. My mother reached for her hand. My father nodded slowly. And I realized this was her stage, her courtroom, and she had invited me to be the villain. I could have yelled. I could have defended myself. But instead, I rose, quietly, walked to the television mounted on the wall, and handed David the small USB stick I had tucked in my purse. He slid it into the port, and within seconds, the living room filled with grainy but undeniable footage from the wedding venue's security camera. Vanessa's red dress gleaming, lifting the candle, tipping it onto the soaked table runner, flames leaping exactly as I had described. Gasps filled the air, louder than her protests. The camera showed the fire spreading, showed her smirking as I struggled, showed my mother running to hold her instead of me. The room went silent, except for the crackle of recorded flames. When the clip ended, I turned to face them all. "That is what happened," I said simply. No yelling, no theatrics, just truth. Vanessa's face drained of color. She lunged toward the TV, shouting, "It was fake, doctored a setup, but the damage was done." Relatives were staring not at me but at her, their expressions shifting from pity to disgust, from confusion to recognition. They saw her clearly for the first time. Kara whispered finally under her breath, and it spread like a verdict. My father stammered, my mother shook her head, but no one moved to comfort Vanessa this time. Even her real estate man edged away, muttering something about needing air, leaving her standing alone. She screamed that I had ruined her life, that I had plotted against her, that I was cruel. But the footage hung in the air heavier than her words. For the first time, her narrative cracked, and I did not gloat. I did not scream back. I simply returned to my seat, took David's hand, and sipped from my glass of water. That silence was stronger than any argument. It was my public revenge, my justice delivered not with fists, but with proof. The party limped on conversations, hushed eyes darting toward Vanessa, who sat trembling, abandoned even by my mother, who could no longer spin excuses. By the time the cake was cut, she was gone, storming out into the night, her cries echoing down the street. I watched her leave and felt nothing but relief. For years, I had been her shield, her scapegoat, her ATM. That night in front of the family that had always chosen her, I became her mirror, forcing them to see her without filters. And once they saw, they could never unsee. After the birthday party, the shift was immediate. The footage spread quietly among relatives, whispered about over phone calls passed between cousins who replayed it until there was no doubt left. Vanessa could no longer spin her story into sympathy. People avoided her at gatherings, friends stopped inviting her out. Neighbors looked away when she walked down the street. Even online, her attempts to post glamorous selfies were met with silence or snide comments. She was not the victim anymore. She was the arsonist who set her sister's wedding on fire. Within a week, her landlord served her a notice. The lease I had frozen officially collapsed when the rent went unpaid, and there was no one left to co-sign or rescue her. She begged the roommates for help, but they were already packing their bags, unwilling to risk eviction on her behalf. By the time the month ended, Vanessa's things were piled on the curb, her expensive shoes scattered, her designer bags stuffed with clothes spilling open in the rain. I drove by once not to gloat, but to witness. She sat on the steps, head in her hands, phone pressed to her ear, no doubt calling my parents for yet another rescue. And they did rescue her, at least financially. The tuition I had revoked was quietly paid by them. The emergency fund they had always claimed did not exist suddenly opened for her. They dipped into their savings, grumbling about sacrifice, but they still did it. Yet even that could not shield her from consequences this time. The university flagged her for behavioral review when word of the fire reached their administration, and while she was not expelled outright, her enrollment was suspended pending evaluation. That meant months off, no classes, no student housing. She was 31, living back in her childhood bedroom with no degree, no job, and no allies outside of two parents whose patience was wearing thin. The calls to me stopped after the video, but I heard through Kara that Vanessa had been ranting to anyone who would listen, claiming I had doctored the footage, claiming David had framed her. No one believed her. The footage was too clear, the pattern too obvious. Employers she had interviewed with withdrew offers, one even citing character concerns. The fall was not sudden, it was steady, like watching a tower crumble brick by brick until nothing was left but dust. And through it all, I remained silent. I did not comment online, I did not answer relatives' questions, I did not defend myself. I let the truth sit there undeniable and allowed her lies to collapse under their own weight. For the first time in my life, I was not the one carrying her mess. She was drowning in it alone. The irony was sharp. For years, she had accused me of acting superior, of thinking I was better, but I had never felt superior. I had felt exhausted, drained, suffocated. Now, as she sat in the ruins of her own making, the only thing I felt was distance and peace. The fall of Vanessa was not a spectacle I celebrated. It was a long overdue consequence, the kind life delivers when someone refuses to face their own reflection. Healing did not arrive with a single moment of clarity or a dramatic announcement. It arrived quietly in the small routines David and I began to build once the chaos had finally ebbed. After Vanessa's collapse into her own consequences, the silence that followed was almost startling. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, no pounding at the door. For the first time in years, I could sit at my kitchen table and sip coffee without bracing for an interruption. David and I moved into a new apartment, a place with light streaming through wide windows far from the smoke-stained memories of the wedding night. We unpacked slowly, deliberately, filling the space not with expensive things, but with pieces that made us feel steady, bookshelves stacked with novels we loved. A small rug David picked out that felt warm under bare feet, frames of photos where our smiles were unforced. Healing came when I realized I could laugh again without scanning my phone. It came when David and I sat on the balcony watching the city fade into evening, talking about plans that had nothing to do with Vanessa, nothing to do with fire or betrayal. It came when I stopped expecting an apology that would never arrive. Because I understood finally that apologies from people like her are weapons disguised as olive branches, words twisted to regain control. I no longer needed them. I no longer needed her. What I needed was boundaries, and for the first time, I had them. The silence was not empty. It was rich, full of possibility, full of a life that had been waiting for me behind the wall of obligations and guilt. My parents tried to bring her name up now and then, but I refused to engage. I told them calmly that they could choose to support her if they wished, but I would not. I told them love does not mean endless rescue, that family does not mean forfeiting your safety, and when my mother accused me of being cold, I answered with clarity. Cold is finally refusing to burn. I was not cold. I was healed. The message I carried into each day was simple but powerful. You cannot save someone who has decided destruction is easier than change. You cannot build your life around someone who only wants to tear it down, but you can save yourself. You can choose silence over chaos, boundaries over guilt, strength over appeasement. And that choice does not make you cruel. It makes you free. Healing meant allowing myself to feel that freedom without shame. It meant walking away, not with anger, but with acceptance. I could not rewrite what Vanessa had done, but I could refuse to let it define me. And so I did. Closure did not arrive as a triumphant victory. It arrived as a steady certainty that I no longer had to live inside the cycle of destruction my sister had created. Vanessa's downfall was dramatic, yes, but what mattered more was the lesson it carved into me. I learned that silence can be stronger than shouting, that quiet boundaries can dismantle louder manipulations, that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to engage in the script they expect you to play. In the weeks after her eviction, after her suspension, after the family finally stopped trying to patch the pieces, I realized I had been waiting for years for some kind of confession from her, an acknowledgement that she had crossed lines, a recognition of the damage she had caused. But that moment never came, and in its absence, I understood something deeper. Closure was not about her words, it was about my choice. I chose to stop waiting for an apology. I chose to stop giving her opportunities to rewrite the story. I chose to live. David and I celebrated our new beginning not with another party, but with something simpler. We cooked dinner together in our small kitchen, opened a bottle of wine, and ate on the floor, surrounded by unpacked boxes, laughing at nothing in particular. That night felt more like a wedding than the day itself because it was untouched, unburned hours. When my mother called a month later, asking if I would attend Thanksgiving, reminding me Vanessa would be there, I answered with a calm no. She pressed said family should forgive, said blood is thicker than water, but I reminded her that fire is thicker than blood when it is threatening to consume you. I told her, Love without accountability is not love, it is permission. And I would not grant permission anymore. The conversation ended with her sighing, but I did not feel guilt. I felt free. Closure came with that freedom. It came with the realization that my life no longer had to orbit around her chaos, that I could build days filled with peace instead of dread. I stopped checking social media for traces of her, stopped asking cousins for updates, stopped letting her name carry weight in my chest. When I thought of her, I did not feel rage anymore. I felt distance, and distance felt like healing. The final lesson was simple but unshakable. You cannot control the fire someone else sets, but you can choose not to stand in it. You can choose to walk away, to close the door, to protect your peace. And sometimes the greatest justice is not watching them fall, but refusing to fall with them. As David and I sat one evening on our balcony watching the city lights flicker, he asked me if I thought my family would ever admit the truth. I smiled faintly and said no. But I think they know. They know in the silence that follows my absence. They know in the unease that lingers when Vanessa enters a room. They know because the scapegoat they relied on is gone. That is enough. My story is not about fire anymore. It is about the decision to stop burning. And as I close that chapter, I know one thing for certain. I do not need her apology, her approval, or her acknowledgement. I only need the life I am building now, one boundary at a time, one quiet morning at a time, one choice at a time. That is closure. That is justice. That is freedom.